All right. Thanks, Jonathan, for joining us today. And we're going to be talking about ethics and business practices. So I'm looking forward to hearing all that you have to share. Again, this is recorded, so they'll be available to chapter members and folks via our website. So with that being said, take it away, Jonathan. And why don't you're our vice president, and I can officially say that you are our 2019 president-elect for our chapter, ICF Cleveland. So that's exciting. But why don't you just maybe take a minute and just tell everybody who you are and such before you jump into the ethics.
All right, great. Happy to do that, Zach. Thanks for the opportunity to be here to talk with the chapter about this idea, this question of coaching and business ethics. I think this is a really important challenge for us in the coaching world because there's so much swirling around us right now, and that's actually how I come into this conversation. It's because of the swirl. I run a coaching and coach training organization called CoachNet here in Northeast Ohio, where we work with coaches of all stripes. Might be a business coach, might be a leadership coach, or an executive coach, life coach, or even in some cases faith-based coaches. And the questions of ethics and what it is we bring to the table as coaches come up all the time. I come out of the world of journalism, which is a business that is driven by its particular ethics, driven by its particular commitments, and in a lot of ways defined by the changes in those journalistic ethics over the years. And so I think this is an interesting position from which to look at what it means to be bound by ethical decisions in the coaching world. And I'm going to use a little bit of my experience in the journalism world, in the news business, as a framework for us to think about what coaching ethics might mean and what that might look like coming forward for us as coaches who are serious about being professionals in this growing industry called coaching. So ethics, first of all, let's talk about what ethics are. And it is plural. The ICF doesn't have an ethical statement. It has a code of ethics, plural. Now, really what this is these are ethics are sets of moral issues or aspects that define the way you live, the way you function. So these are commitments that we're making as coaches to treat the world around us in general and our clients and students in particular in unique and distinct ways. And one of the things I appreciate about an ethical statement, about ethical commitments, is that these are you might think of them as we're going to decide before a situation comes up how we're going to handle a particular situation. So we're going to make our decision before we're in the fire, before we're in the flame. And once we get into the flame, we won't have to think about, oh my gosh, what do I do now? Because we've already made our ethical decisions long before the circumstance or the situation came up. And I think that's really important for us as coaches in today's changing world. Now, the code of ethics that the ICF commits to applies in a whole bunch of different ways. So we're deciding ahead of time for all of our various roles, whether we're coach, whether we're mentor coach, whether we're supervisor, whether we're coaching instructor, the code of ethics still applies. Now, it applies a little bit differently in those various areas, but it still applies for all of those roles. So all of the pieces of what it means to commit to a coaching posture, an ethical coaching posture comes to life in those unique and distinct ways. So that's key to remember. Second thing that's key to remember, and this is one of the areas where the coaching world diverges from the journalistic world, or the coaching world diverges from other intentional relationships like counseling or say in the medical or legal profession. We have a slightly different set of protections, set of constraints around us than what the medical or legal or counsel or therapeutic world has, because we don't have a legal protection behind us. Coaches are bound by ethical constraints, but there are no unique legal constraints for coaches. Now, what's the difference there? Ethical constraints are what are ethical commitments are, I'm sorry, legal commitments. I'm talking about legal commitments now. Those are opt-out. If you decide not to follow them, there are consequences. If I am driving down the road on the interstate and I go 66 miles an hour in a construction zone, I'm going to get a ticket. It's going to cost me $200. And I am going to have to pay that under penalty of law. Not that there's any truth in that particular story. Okay, there's a little truth in that. Okay, there's a lot of truth in that story. I opted out of my legal commitment here by going too fast in a construction zone. I went 66 in a 50-mile-an-hour zone, and I got a ticket. I got a camera ticket. So I decided that this constraint is not one that I want to follow, and I'm paying the consequences. So that's what a legal situation comes by. They're imposed on us from the outside, and if we don't follow, then consequences develop. So that's one kind of commitment that's behind us. And there really aren't a lot of legal commitments for us as coaches, at least not in this country. There are in some other countries, but in the United States, there really aren't a lot of legal constraints placed on coaches. Like, for example, we don't have to register with the state, get a state license for our coaching. And that's fine. It's more than fine, because we do make ethical commitments to our industry, to our core competencies, to our statement of ethics, to our clients, to our students. We decide from the inside out, we opt in to a number of significant commitments. So ethical commitments are really opt-in. You have to choose to follow them. And if you don't follow them, you are choosing to accept the consequences. So there's a huge choice in an ethical commitment that isn't present in a legal commitment. And we have to remember that as we start thinking about the reality that coaching, especially ICF coaching, is a self-regulated industry. We police our own, because to be a member of the ICF, to be a member of ICF Global, and then by extension to be a member of ICF Cleveland, we are choosing to follow those ethical commitments, and to say, hey, if I don't follow the ethical commitments, I am willing to accept the consequences. And we'll talk a little bit about what some of those consequences are in the ICF world coming up in a couple of minutes. We settle disputes on our own between client and coach, or between multiple coaches directly. All the code of ethics is a set of decisions we've made ahead of time and said, when these particular challenges come up, here's how we're going to handle it. Here's how we're going to handle it. So we're deciding ahead of time that we're going to follow these particular core commitments around the code of ethics. Now, as a chapter leader, like Zach said, I'm the vice president of the Cleveland area chapter this year, president-elect next year, president in 2 years, and Zach would likely say the same things. I do want to suggest that even though the code of ethics doesn't explicitly say this, we should make this, what I'm about to say, we should make a commitment to each other to solve disputes in a distinct and focused way. Three steps. If something comes up between a client and you, or another coach and you, I really want to urge you to follow these 3 steps. And I want to challenge you to make this commitment to each other as coaches, that we're going to hold each other accountable to these 3 steps. Okay, so here we go. Step number 1. When there's an issue, go talk directly to the other person. If Zach and I are working on something and we get sideways from each other on this whole thing, I want to commit. I want to say, publicly, that as a leader in the coaching community, as somebody who's serious about following the coaching code of ethics, if I have a problem with Zach, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Zach and I'm going to say, Zach, we got to work this out. So that's step number 1 is if I have a problem, I'm going to talk to that person directly. Now, that seems kind of obvious, doesn't it? But you'd be amazed at how often, just when human beings are involved, not just even coaches, But when human beings are involved, you'd be amazed at how often that doesn't happen. So let's as chapter members, let's make that commitment. Secondly, if that doesn't work, take someone else with you and have another shot at resolving it. Now, like for example, if Zach and I are sideways to each other on this conversation, and I know it, and I've gone to him once and it didn't work. If I really want to settle this according to the code of ethics, I want to go back to Zach a second time, and I want to take somebody else with me. Maybe Jim Smith. I want to take Jim Smith with me back to talk to Zach to see if we can work it out, and Jim can help us mediate through the particular challenge. So that's step number 2. First of all, you go talk to the person directly. Secondly, you go talk to the person directly a second time, but you take somebody with you. And then the third step, and only the third step, is to go on to coachfederation.org and file an ethical conduct review process complaint. The ICF has a very detailed process for ethical conduct process reviews, and it's a great way to get something resolved once and for all. And remember those ethical commitments that we opt into, we commit to when we think about how how our ethical commitments come to life. This is where those consequences from committing the ethical statement, the code of ethics, start becoming real. So the ICF Conduct Review Board will work its way through the process, and they'll investigate what's going on. I always have this picture of like a CSI kind of investigation. I'm sure it's not nearly that dramatic. Well, they'll make some phone calls and they'll dive into what's going on here, what's happening in the conversation, and they'll try to get to the core of, hey, what's actually happening in this situation, and how did these two individuals go sideways? Now that process will be a lot smoother, be resolved a lot more quickly if you've done the first 2 steps. So I really do want to urge you, as an active chapter member who is serious about coaching ethics, if you find yourself in a situation where something's gone off track, follow those 3 steps. Go talk to the person directly. If that doesn't work, go back and talk to them again directly, but this time take somebody with you to help mediate through the process. And then, and only then, if those 2 steps don't work, then and only then file that ethical conduct review complaint with the ICF. Too many coaches go immediately to the conduct review board. Oh, I heard about this. And they go immediately to the conduct review board, and then the conduct review board dives into it and discovers after the fact that, oh my goodness, there's really not anything serious here. This was 2 people that are mad at each other, that it all could have been worked out by talking to them directly. So that would be my best guidance. So now as we're thinking about ethics, as practicing coaches, as meaningful coaches who want the best for our profession, want the best for our clients, want the best for the people that we work with, as coaches who are serious about the ongoing conversation, we talked about the big framework of what ethics actually are, the moral guidelines, the compass that keeps us on track. We've talked about how to handle a situation when an ethical snafu, if you will, shows up. Let's dive into some key areas that ethical challenges come up. And these are the 4 key areas that I want to suggest every practicing coach, every practitioner coach should have nailed, should have taken care of. So 4 key areas. First of all, confidentiality and compliance. Confidentiality is a huge issue for us as coaches. Now, this is another area where coaches are different than doctors and therapists and lawyers and other kinds of helping professionals, because we do not have a legal standard for confidentiality. Coaches are not protected by a legal standard for confidentiality. This is an ethical standard. You are choosing to keep what happens in your sessions between you and your clients, and only between you and your clients. The details of those sessions, because of your ethical commitment, They're secret. They're your information to know. They're your client's information to know. They ain't nobody else. Now, here's the thing. In most states of this country, you can be subpoenaed to provide the notes from your coaching conversations. You can be subpoenaed. Ohio is one of those. You can be subpoenaed. To my knowledge, it's not ever happened in Ohio. Now, I could be wrong about that, but to my knowledge, no coach has ever actually been subpoenaed. But in preparation for this conversation, I did make a couple of phone calls, and yeah, it does appear that the Ohio state law would say a coach can be subpoenaed to provide their notes in some kind of legal proceeding. So definitely be aware of that. Now, what does that mean? That means A, keep really good records. That's an ethical commitment. That means B, be really careful about what you put in those records, because you may be subpoenaed. Now, I'm not saying obstruct justice. I'm not saying obscure legal proceedings. I'm saying make sure that you're writing down the things that you know are critical. And critical is defined by you and the client. You work it out between you and the client. A good rule of thumb when there is an ethical question is to go talk to the people involved at all times. It sounds obvious when I say that. It sounds like, well, duh, Jonathan, of course we'd go talk. Well, you'd be amazed at how many people that when if that's not said explicitly, it's not going to be followed that way. And confidentiality and note taking and those kinds of things are critical along those lines. So in most jurisdictions, you can be subpoenaed to provide your notes or to testify to what happens, because there's no legal protection from coaching for coaches. And I'll say it again. I have not ever encountered it. 22 and a half years I've been coaching now. In fact, literally it was 22 and a half years on Tuesday of this week. So I can tell you with a high level of confidence, 22 and a half years, I've never encountered a coach being pulled into a legal environment. It has happened, but not to anybody in my circles. And that would just be something to keep in mind. So just be thoughtful about what's there when you think about what you're going to put in your notes and how you're going to interact around that conversation. It's a critical thing to remember that you do have to be, you can be subpoenaed. And this would be very similar to the journalism world. Sometimes you hear stories about reporters whose notes are being subpoenaed, and these reporters are being requested to turn in, whatever it is they have that on a particular topic, because there's some kind of legal impact or legal import. Very similar. Refusing to do that can land you in jail, just like in those reporter type situations. And I don't mean that to scare you. I want you to go into this eyes wide open. This is a real thing. Now, there is a difference between confidentiality and anonymity. That's important. There's a difference between confidentiality. What's confidentiality? Confidentiality means that no information that can be traced back to the other party is shared beyond the participants in a relationship. For example, if Zach and I are in a coaching relationship, I can't say to people, I shouldn't say to people, you know what, Zach Prosser is my coaching client. I shouldn't be telling people like that unless Zach gives me permission. If Zach says, yeah, that's fine, you can use my name to market for more clients, all good. But unless I've gone to Zach and said, hey, do you mind if I use your name as I look for more clients? I'm not solid inside the code of ethics until I've gotten that kind of permission. Same goes for administrative assistants and folks like that. If you have an administrative assistant who knows the names and the contact information of your coaching clients, you better have an ethical agreement with them. Say, hey, look, you're not going to tell people. You can't tell people who my coaching clients are. You can't tell them. Especially, oh my goodness, for goodness sake, if they see your notes, they cannot breathe a word of that, unless the client gives them explicit, and I would say to you, written permission. So anonymity, on the other hand, is something a little bit different. if you describe a situation that goes on in a coaching conversation, but there's no way for the people who are hearing your description to connect back that when I'm talking about this situation, I'm actually talking about my coaching that I do with Zach. I'm talking that I'm coaching Zach, and I know here are the details about what. As long as there's no way for them to figure out that, oh, the person he's talking about in that situation is Zach Prosser, or is the client specifically, that's anonymity. And you can satisfy the conditions of anonymity to use the lesson learned from a coaching situation and pass that information on. But you really do have to be careful, critically careful, to make sure that nothing about the way you describe the situation can tie the situation specifically back to the particular person involved in the conversation with you. So if there's any question, if you have any question about any of that, don't use the example. Don't talk about it. If you think it's even a possibility, zip the lip, as my wife says to her second grade class. If there's any possibility about that, don't go there. Don't do that. Now, last thing about confidentiality and compliance is note-taking. Like I mentioned, you do have to think about what you end up putting in your notes. You do have to think about what might be useful, what might be meaningful there. Secondly, the second part of that is you should destroy your notes after a given period of time. The guideline I use, and it's kind of wide and open-ended. I'll just tell you the guideline that I use, legally speaking, it's kind of wide and open-ended, is 2 years after a coaching relationship ends, I dispose of the notes. And I do two things. I contact the client and say, hey, do you want a copy of what I wrote down? I give them that option at the 2-year mark after the coaching relationship is over. And whether or not they want them, 30 days later, I delete them off my computer and I shred any paper copies I have. 2 years after the relationship is over. So you really should dispose of records to the best of yourself, to the best of your abilities. All right. So that's compliance and confidentiality. First of 4 areas. Second of 4 areas that coaches have to have nailed. And the rest of these are much less complicated than compliance and confidentiality, just so you know. Second area, when to refer. When to refer. There's 2 windows here about when a referral to another professional is important, whether it's another coach, whether it's a therapeutic professional of some kind, whether it's it could be a number of different things. You could find yourself referring in a number of different situations, and then the other wrinkle here is you may need to refer yourself. Coaches sometimes need to take a break and work with a counselor or a therapist or a pastor to really evaluate, am I in the frame of mind where I can be helpful to my client? So understanding when it is you need a referral is the right thing to do for ethical reasons. And I have a simple guideline here, simple guideline that I want to offer to you. And that is, first of all, if the client is constantly bringing up topics that are in the not recent past, but more distant past, that's a good indication that there are therapy type challenges in front of the particular client. So they bring up things that are 10 and 15 years ago, and those are consistently coming up. That says, okay, there may be something going on here. Now, unless you are a trained counselor, and I'm just going to say this as clearly as I possibly can, unless you are a trained counselor, it is not okay to just refer some, go get counseling. It's not okay. You know what I think you need? Don't do that. And if you do that, whatever you do, don't tell them I told you to do that. Because I'm not. I'm telling you the exact opposite. Unless you are a trained counselor, the appropriate response is to have a conversation. There's a theme here, isn't there? Have a conversation with your client to say, hey, look, I'm concerned about this. Can we talk about what might be going on here? What value do you think you might see for yourself by discussing this with a mental health professional? Now, that's dangerous. You got a pretty good reason to do that. You might be putting your coaching relationship at a little bit of risk, but I would suggest to you, you'll be glad you did. You'll be glad you did. Okay? So that's a key component. When the client is looking backwards consistently bringing up situations that are multiple years in the past, that is a problem. That's a problem. That's something to be concerned about as you're thinking about what might happen next. All right, then the other big component here is when you realize as a coach that you're struggling to be present, to be open, flexible, and able to build spontaneous relationship with your client. That's right out of the coaching presence competency. When you start having questions about that ability there, if that lingers for longer than 30 days, might be time to get a tune-up. Now, I will tell you flat out that you think all this comes together just easily? No, that's not the deal. I have 5 key people that invest in me. I have a mentor coach. When I got my MCC, my mentor coach said, hey, I would like to continue with you. We don't need to talk monthly anymore. We don't need to talk every couple of weeks anymore, but maybe we should talk 3 times a year. And he works with me on sharpening my coaching skills. So that's an ethical commitment that I make. I take that to the level of ethics that I am constantly being mentor coached, because one of the ethical commitments we make in the code of ethics is that we'll continue to develop our skills. Secondly, I have a coach that works with me on running a small business. So I actually have 2 different coaches, a mentor coach and a small business coach that works with me on running a more effective training organization and finding more coaching clients. Makes a huge difference. I have a pastor that works with me. I happen to be Christian, and I want to be serious about my faith development. So I have a pastor that I see on a regular and consistent basis. I also have a counselor that I see on a regular and consistent basis, who I also happen to have a long history of depression. And I want to make sure that that is managed well, because if it's not, it affects how I serve my clients. That's a part of my ethical preparation for making a difference in the lives of my clients. So those 4 guys, plus I also have an accountability partner who he and I talk about 3 things. We talk about, are we being good husbands and fathers? Are we treating the people around us as well as we possibly can? This is a huge value for both of us. And we talk about how we're doing as the leaders of our small businesses. We talk about the personal, human, ethical commitments along those lines. And we're pretty transparent about that in that process. It takes those 5 relationships for me to stay on track, to stay in the center of my ethical commitments. And I would say to you that you need relationships like that as well. And when one or more of those, and goodness sakes, if 2 people in your circle like that say to you, you're struggling a little bit, it might make sense to think about that therapeutic relationship and understand that it might be time for you to refer yourself to counseling. All right, in our last couple of minutes here, 2 final areas. Relational ethics. Bottom line, treat people the way you want to be treated. Do what you say you're going to do. When you read this section of the Code of Ethics on the ICF website, it's one of those things that you think that, well, yeah, this is what adults do. But unless you say it explicitly and talk about it from time to time, I think this one's challenging. Treat people the way you want to do. Do what you want to be treated. Do what you say you're going to do. Be on time. That's an ethical commitment, believe it or not. It's a standard that you decide to follow or you don't. It's not explicitly stated in the Code of Ethics, hey, be on time or else you're unethical. But it does have a line in there about do the things you say you're going to do and make sure that you deliver on the promises that you make. And I would suggest to you that if you say you have a coaching call at 1:30 and you call at 1:37, you're not delivering. I know it's a hard line, but it's something to definitely consider. And then also in the relational area is the emotional, romantic, even sexual boundary between coach and client should never be changed. Should never be changed. Now, there's no prohibition against coaching your spouse. It does take special spouses to be able to do that. I would never try to coach my wife. Would never try to coach my wife. Nor would she try to coach me. She's not a coach. She's a second grade teacher. So our skills kind of go like this. I'd never try to do that. But basically it says that as a result of the code of ethics says that as a result of your coaching relationship, there should be no change in the status of your coaching relationship. And if there is, it's time to stop the coaching. If the status of your relationship changes, if it becomes Facebook official, you probably should stop coaching that person, at least until your life plays out a little bit further. So I definitely would urge you to think about that. So that's the relational component. And then finally, financial ethics, including conflict of interest. Always, 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 always act in the best interest of your coaching relationships, which means your client, by the way. It doesn't mean in your own best interest. I mean, think about your own best interest, but make your mistake on the side of taking care of your clients. That's how you get a great reputation. That's how you get clients referring you. Act in the best interest of your client. And when you can't do that, act in the best interest of the profession as a whole. And there are some things that we as coaches, I would suggest, can do for each other that would make a huge difference. Be above board with money all the time. Be transparent with your money. Avoid the appearance of anything untoward, and your client being able to say, you know what, Zach had my back through that whole thing. That's the kind of thing that really, really matters. Really, really matters. So be above board with money at all times. And I would urge you to have a written financial policy. Maybe you don't have to include it in your coaching agreements every time, in your documentation, in your contracts, but have one available on your website. Write out an ethical financial policy for your coaching practice. In fact, I'll flat out say to Zach, I'll be happy to come back and do this again on another webinar like this, where I walk through how we teach coaches to write that financial policy. I'll be happy to do that on a webinar at some point in the process. And then also remember, this is the last thing, remember that the client can end a coaching relationship at any time, and you will do yourself a solid. Something, it's going to surprise you eventually. You're going to get caught off guard eventually. And having that written financial policy in place is just another example of deciding ahead of time how you're going to handle stuff when it comes up, because it's going to come up. All right, two last things. There's a great FAQ on the International Coach Federation webpage, coachfederation.org/ethics, ETHICS-FAQs, ethics-FAQs. That's a great practical examples of how the Code of Ethics comes to life. And there is a free course that'll get you 3 hours of continuing coach education in the area of coaching ethics. If you haven't taken it, absolutely worth doing. coachfederation.org/ethics-CCE-course. And when we send out the recording to the chapter, we'll include these two links in the process. So Zach, there was a whirlwind tour of the world of coaching ethics and the key areas that coaches who are serious about practicing, running a coaching practice that makes a difference should pay attention. So that's what I have brought to the chapter today.
Awesome. Thanks, Jonathan, for your time. I appreciate it. It was very helpful information. We'll make this recording available on our website. And if anyone wants to get in touch with you or has questions about any of the content, how can they do that? How can they reach out?
The easiest way is to shoot me an email at Jonathan, JONATHAN, at CoachNet, COACHNET.org. And you can find me on the chapter website. I'm listed with contact information on the chapter website. I'm definitely active in that area. But Jonathan at CoachNet.org is the easiest place. And or find me on Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter. I'm on all of those in the obvious ways. Always first and last name, Jonathan, JONATHAN, and Reitz is REITZ. All right.